Where is Thomas Bryant going to have the biggest impact on the Pacers? How is he going to help his new team? We'll dive in to the numbers today, plus some ripple effects from the trade, some cap geekery, and a deeper dive on why the Pacers love their two-point guard lineups on today's Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, y'all? Happy Tuesday, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes, and today we have a lot to dive into, wrapping up the Thomas Bryant trade by looking at some ripple effects from it from a team building perspective, but really diving into what he has been in the NBA and how he can help the Pacers. Typically like to do that before the player plays a game for the team, but such is life when you get traded and play in a game 5 hours later, which is so impressive. But we'll dive into some old numbers from him and how I think that will matter for him here in Indiana, as we did with Moses Brown and James Wiseman and every other Pacers edition for all of time. Then we'll talk about, again, some ripple effects from that and some other cap stuff that I think you should just keep in your brain as the Pacers push forward this season. At the end, we'll talk two point guard groups. I stressed them a lot with Andrew Nembhard's return, and I want to really explain why I think they're so valuable to the Pacers. But we must start with Thomas Bryant again. Feels weird doing this after he already scored 7 points for the Pacers, pulled in 2 boards, didn't miss a shot, and had a nice debut. That first stint figuring stuff out, was great after that. I did get a kick out of him. I think he played in the Indy Classic in that building when he was with IU, and he said, oh, yeah, I remember playing, I'm paraphrasing, but he remembered playing in Bankers Life Fieldhouse. I was like, oh, yeah. Some new lingo to learn here. That made me smile. I found that quite endearing. So Thomas Bryant, the thing that stands out about him, among many things, right? Like, this guy scored 14 points a game in his career. He scored 13 points a game in a season where he actually played. He's been a 7 rebounds a game kind of guy. Like, he's put up numbers before in decent minutes. That was with the crappy Wizards team. But, that kind of production doesn't just happen. And all of those years, he was shooting pretty solidly well from the field, over 60% in 2 of those years. And so obviously it's unrealistic to suspect that this is like a, really awesome offensive weapon. If he was that great, he'd be playing all the time. He wasn't really playing for the Heat. But when you dive into what he's done well before and why he keeps landing on teams, why teams want him, right, is that he's got a lot of versatility on the offensive end of the floor. And I think that actually makes him a pretty good fit with the Pacers specifically. I kind of alluded to this before when I talked about the equation of him and Jalen Smith's similarities. Not that he's as good as Jalen Smith, right? Jalen Smith just got paid a bunch of money this summer for good reason. But Jalen Smith could shoot well. Last year was scorched earth the first couple months of the season, but could also go inside, had some force down there, and battle on the glass. And if you look at Thomas Bryant's offensive abilities in his career, that really stands to similar reason to me, right? Without diving into the specific play type numbers, which we'll do in just a second, for his career, not just last season or anything, his entire career, he's finished 80% of his shots from 0 to 3 feet. That's crazy good. That's crazy good. Very good dunk guy, which matters to me. Like, I think it's very frustrating when players try to have touch when they can just dunk. Just dunk it, man. He's a dunk guy. He's a strong finisher on the rim. He's got decent enough touch in the mid-range. It's not great, but 53.6% for his career from 3 to 10 feet. So in the paint, you can expect that he is going to make the shots when he does decide to take them. And that's a large percentage of his shots, right? That's over 60% of his looks come from inside 10 feet. And so that's obviously good, right? A big man who can score inside, full stop, that's good, right? But the versatility part comes that he has a jumper. What was his first shot with the Pacers? Bouncing it in from a free throw line jumper. What was one of his other made shots in his Pacers debut? A three. And that's where the Jalen Smith part really kind of clicks. For all the things Isaiah Jackson is good at, the jumper has never really been a part of his game. He can do it. It's just not necessarily something he liked to go to or will continue to go to in the future. Moses Brown, certainly not a jumper guy. James Wiseman working on it like Jackson, but not a jumper guy. Thomas Bryant is a jumper guy. Over 20% of his shots in his career from deep. And some seasons they have fallen at a high clip. Last year with the Heat was not one of them. We'll get into that when we get into play type data. So that kind of range really comes into a package of a player who can do lots of stuff. Pick and pop, pick and roll. inside the paint, you're comfortable throwing it to him. He's a smart cutter. People will laugh, but the famous picture of him cutting into space as LeBron is turning and shooting what could be the iconic shot to set the record for points in NBA history that he made. Thomas Bryant cuts to the basket and posts up in the middle of the photo. It's awesome. That's the kind of thing that he does. So that is like the standout, zoomed out picture without getting into any play type that it is. He has offensive versatility. But if you really want to dive in, and then again, this is a how he can help thing. This is positive stuff. He's got defensive concerns. Certainly, if he was, really strong at all this stuff, he'd play more often. But if you dive into play type stuff, it kind of paints a similar picture, just on a very much more micro level. Last year with the Heat, he was their backup at times in the season. He was their backup at times last season. 38 games played for them, dealing with injuries at times. Then they got, different players and he fell out of the rotation. But in those 38 games, he was awesome on putbacks, ranking in the 87th percentile in the NBA in terms of points per possession. He was 90th percentile on post-ups, only 36 of them the whole year, but finished those very well. Was good in pick and rolls. Most of his pick and do something, right? Pop, roll, slip, whatever. 36 of the 47 screens he set and then did something last year. He was rolling with the Heat, so more often than that, even though he can be a pop threat, and he finished his rolls very well, right? He was 1.4 points per possession on those. Did not finish pick and pops well at all last year. And that's what's really interesting is he shot it well from three this ongoing season. He shot it very well from three the season before last year, but was dreadful last year in his 38 games. 18.2% that first season with the Heat. Just dreadful. It's only 4 for 22. That's small volume, but for a guy whose whole career has been not like that, even though he's definitely a small volume shooter, he's never taken 100 in a season. We're at 350 for a career. Like, that's enough for me to feel like he can make them, and it's okay if he takes 1 or 2 a game. He was off, really off last year with the Heat, but still did stuff around the basket with the putbacks and the post-ups, and the spot-ups went bad, the pick and pops went bad, but when he did stuff around the basket, it was good. His cutting was his most common play type, which makes sense in a Miami team, right? But then you go back a year prior, and that he split time with the Lakers. He technically split time between the Lakers and the Nuggets, but a very, very, very large portion of his minutes that year, 876 of the 1,081, so about 85% came with the Lakers, and he shot much better that year. And that year, his synergy page is crazy. Pick and roll as the roll man, and anything he did, roll man, pops, and slipping all together, 87th percentile finishing plays from those. 1.4 points per possession on rolls, 1.19 on pick and pops because he made his threes that year, especially with the Lakers, 44% from deep with the Lakers that season on his 53-point attempts. So those plays looked good. Turns out playing with LeBron's pretty helpful. 90th percentile finishing plays on cuts. 94th percentile in transition. That's going to matter a lot with the Pacers. Last year's 99th percentile in transition, albeit on 16 possessions with the Heat. Very small volume. 87th percentile on offensive rebound putbacks with the Heat, and 92nd percentile on spot-ups with that Lakers team. I just said the Heat. I meant the Lakers. So 2 years ago, he was a beast offensively, and the Lakers got rid of him. I can't remember if there was he wanted to be relocated. I remember reading some reporting about that. And then he won the championship with the Nuggets. So good for him. But with that, what stands out to me about all that is even though you look at a page where their points per possession rating, Synergy has their terms to define it. It just says excellent, 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 excellent for all these stats. Like, you can't expect that from a backup center. But the fact that in pockets of his career, that's what he's been, tells the same story as a lot of his macro stats do, which is he can do a lot of things. And I think that is going to be where he presents his value on offense, especially playing with a group that has McConnell and Toppin and whoever sticks with that group when health returns, is that if they need him to provide spacing and set screens for McConnell, he can. I thought his screening looked good in his debut. And that, of course, you're not going to have good pick and whatever stats if you don't set good screens. If they need him to space around those two, he can. If Toppin's spacing and he needs to go to the basket or cut, he can. Like, once he gets some synergy with that group, I'm not saying he'll be as good as the backup centers the Pacers have had in recent seasons with Jackson and Smith, But I think he can do pretty well because of that versatility. I think it will fit in the system. And if he can run, which he can run, he's got not quite gazelle-like, but he is pretty mobile. I think if you just had to tell me how Thomas Bryant can help the Pacers, I would just say offensive versatility, and that will make him a good fit. I like what the numbers say about how that fit will go. The question is, how consistent can he be? And in terms of how much he can help in terms of what that peak can be, I think the standout things will be, does his rebounding look awesome or just good? And can he defend at all? Defense, as with many bigs who can't get on the floor a ton, will be very important, right? If he can clean up misses, that'll help a lot, obviously. But if he can actually do what he did against the Pelicans a few times and thwart some shots and be a big body around the basket and force guys to miss, or at least consider, oh, crap, there's a defender down there, that's what will swing how much he can help. But what I almost guarantee he will be able to help the Pacers with is providing a versatile offensive threat inside and out. And for a bench group that's had that in the past, we've seen that be successful. Looking forward to seeing it once again. Let's talk about some other ripples from this trade, stuff that I've been thinking about, and something that you need to think about, or at least know about the Pacers and their two-way players. It's going to be a big topic of discussion leading into the trade deadline. Before we get to any of that, though, we need to talk about the great people over at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action and get in on the NBA hoops with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because right now, new customers on FanDuel can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. How about that? The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets in the NFL all in one place. So when you get that hunch in the middle of a game, happens to everybody at some point, you think you know what's coming. Well, you can check out the latest stats from the action. You can view live play-by-play and do so much more right on the same page where you place your bets. You can be as informed as possible. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That is on FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. We're back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day, or second listen, Locked On Heat, because they discussed the Thomas Bryant trade from the Heat perspective today, and it was very interesting. And the Heat are going to be a fascinating team, I think, on the trade front this year. And I talk to Wes all the time now because we do Locked On NBA together, so love catching up and hearing what he's doing. And David Rameau's the best. So Locked On Heat for your second listen. The secondary effect of this trade that is very interesting to me is very small but very relevant, and that is Thomas Bryant makes the minimum, right? So that's why they could do this way. They're still under the tax, just barely, but his contract is fully guaranteed this season. There is no sort of like waiver that can happen to free up some money with Bryant, like there could have been with Wiseman had he not got hurt, like there is with James Johnson, like there has been for lots of players in the past for lots of teams. Thomas Bryant's contract is fully guaranteed. So one, they're really betting it works, right? If he doesn't work out, they ate up a lot of flexibility to believe in that versatility I just described. But two, that means they are right up against the tax and they no longer can use their backup center as a flexibility tool. Sort of. So there's two things about this trade that are interesting. Currently, the Pacers, $126.5 thousand from the tax. That's per my own tracking, but I think that's about right. I've talked to other people about it. So one thing is, I'm not saying I expect this. In fact, I would probably guess no, given the Pacers' current reality, but you never know how things can change. By doing this trade the very first day possible, it actually is feasible that Thomas Bryant can be traded by the Pacers this season, right? The way the restriction works in terms of the number of days that a player is to be on a team does pretty much exactly fit. Now that's already over. Paul Reed, for example, signed with the Pistons on Monday. He can't be traded this season by Detroit. So that there was like a very small window. Dennis Schroeder can be traded by Golden State, Anthony Melton by Brooklyn. Not a thing that I think is important or why the Pacers were rushing to do this. I think they rushed to do this because they really need a backup five. I think that's more so important for the other two guys I just said, but that is a fact of this. What is more important to me is that stuff I already said. The contract is guaranteed, and they are that close to the tax because, don't get me wrong, the Pacers could just, in theory, depending on how the next couple of weeks go, and I think fans would hate this, but it's like not unreasonable given what the cap rise is going to be and what they did this last offseason to just ride it out the rest of this year, and then assess in the offseason what your options are and what your reality is, right? They would be under the tax that way. But if they want some flexibility to do anything at all, convert a two-way guy. We'll get to the two-way guys in just a second, really just a second. If they want to convert a two-way guy, if they want to sign a guy to more than one 10-day contract, right? They can probably right now, I think, off the top of my head, can only afford one 10-day at all, not two, not one and then another deal, right? And you can always sign guys like really late in the season with any extra space you have. But I think the Pacers' reality is they're very, very limited now on what they can do going forward, unless they can find a way to free up other money. Committing to Thomas Bryant means this is it. This is their group. And if they want to do something else, they have to think about cost cutting and changes, because taking on money in trades for them would put them in the tax, unless it's like a exactly even money trade. And taking back more money than they send out would hard cap them at the first apron, which they're kind of close to because some of their bonuses. So like they have a lot of financial things to think about, and taking in more guaranteed money just makes those all the more pressing, right? So keep that in mind, that if you think the Pacers should be trying to do certain things and change directions, if you think the Pacers need to do something drastic right now this season, you should be looking out for them to try to cut money from their books in some way, because that would give them flexibility to make those kind of moves. Big, grand direction change, not even direction changers, but just slight direction adjusters. It'd be way easier if the Pacers had that extra flexibility. I spent way too much time explaining why that's reality, but that is the reality. And so I tweeted that the day they made the trade. I said the Pacers have enough for a 10-day contract, but not much else to function until very late in the season. Not worth getting into that specific thing until later in the season. But I tweeted this. Have to wonder if they'll try to free up wiggle room in some other way. On Blue Sky, I said the same thing, but I went a little more specific there. I said, curious how much they'll consider some of their other avenues to widen the gap below the luxury tax. And then in parentheses, to me, the most obvious two, try to dump James Wiseman's deal or waive James Johnson in the next couple weeks. So the explainers on that would be Wiseman's money now guaranteed for the season because he's out for the year with that injury, right? So if they could attach a second rounder to him, or not even that, if they could attach just the cash required for a different team to pay out the rest of his contract, and someone would take him in for that, that probably would be not enough. It'd probably have to be more cash than that. But if that would be enough to get his money off their books, that would be a huge deal for the Pacers. All right. But they sent out cash in the Johnny Furphy trade. They have to be cognizant of the cash spend and take in all that stuff. But either way, that is a route they could take to free up James Wiseman's amount of money away from the tax, and that could be a significant amount of savings. They could, in theory, think about dumping Isaiah Jackson's contract, although I think having a full bird rights restricted free agent guy coming off an injury could actually be a tool for them to get a nice contract on their books, even though it would stink for Isaiah Jackson. That's reality. It's just how it is. And the other option is, hey, the yearly, not yearly, it didn't really happen last year, the common discussion, the James Johnson waiver, right? They've cut him a million times. He signed how many? 7, 8 contracts with this teams in the last 2 seasons. And when they're healthy, like last year, they only cut him for trade flexibility purposes, right? They cut him to make the Siakam trade possible with roster spots, and then just gave him some 10 days until they gave him another deal, right? But they didn't plan on it. Like, he survived the cut down date on the team, even though they signed him in mid-December. And the year before that, he also survived the cut down date, and then they cut him for trade reasons when they did that crazy big trade, I think with the Bucks, and then they signed him back 2 days later, right? So his contract has become guaranteed every year. So they're very close to his hitting his contract cap hit being $750,000 for the season, which is how much money he had guaranteed. But I do think they have to actually, if they were healthy this year and had enough bodies that this didn't matter, or because they haven't been healthy, they've had to make moves like signing Moses Brown, like trading for Thomas Bryant, and because Wiseman's deal became guaranteed when he got hurt, they actually have to think about, oh, do we need to cut James Johnson? Not necessarily because they don't want him on the team, right? He's been just as helpful as any year in terms of being a vet, and all sorts of teams value what that player is. Tristan Thompson, Markieff Morris, Patty Mills. I mean, I could go on, naming vets on good and bad teams. But for the Pacers specifically, they might have to think about the opportunity cost of having such a player on their team in a way that they haven't had to in recent seasons, right? Last year, much farther from the tax. The year before that, even farther from the tax, right? They didn't really need to think about, oh, what can we do instead? Whatever, we'll just cut him later. This year, that that reality is different, right? I'm not saying they will or will not. I'll get into more specifics with that closer to the guarantee date deadline, which is the January 7th is when that decision would have to be. But I do think it's noteworthy that I think it's December 22nd. It might be the 23rd is the day that his contract is actually more than his guaranteed amount, which is a very cap dorky way of saying they have to start thinking about what they want to do with James Johnson. And if that's how they want to get flexibility, that's great. But they also clearly value him a lot, right? So we'll see where any of this heads and what they decide they need to do from a flexibility perspective, or if they need different or more players. And maybe Aaron Nesmith and Ben Shepherd come back and they're healthy and they say, great, we don't need to do that. We'll see. You can make the case either way. I'm not advocating for anything at the specific moment, just explaining the Pacers' reality that they are now facing after this Thomas Bryant trade. One more thing I want to get to today, totally unrelated to anything we've talked about, but I keep talking about Andrew Nembhard returning and how that lets the Pacers get back to something they covet in their style, playing 2 point guards together. Not necessarily covet, but they really love, and it really makes them better. Here's how. Rick Carlisle explained it. We'll get to that to close out today's Locked On Pacers. Before we do that, though, got to talk about two great groups of people. First up, the good people over at Robinhood. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.25% APY on uninvested cash and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on IRA account contributions. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 per month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at Robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply for product-specific disclosures. Visit Robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risks. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. We also need to talk about Rocket Money. Rocket Money can help you find subscriptions that you forgot about, or even that you were paying for maybe twice. That's happened to lots of people. People I know had subscriptions that they didn't even realize they were still paying for. Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel those unwanted subscriptions. They monitor your spending, helping you lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's your subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features, like that subscription tracker. And their goals feature helps people automatically set money aside for the future. So no more stressing about budgeting every month. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. One more time. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day. Our second listen, 2 ones, because I was just watching these games. Locked On Clippers, because James Harden had 34 points at halftime against the Jazz. Or Locked On Nuggets or Locked On Kings, because that game was awesome. Nuggets dominated. Kings came back. Then the Nuggets came back, and the ending was amazing. And Jamal Murray looked really good for a blip. It was awesome. And both of those shows have a lot to discuss from that game. What I want to close out today is getting a little more in the weeds on something that I just say a lot, but don't really provide meaningful reason for. I just say it, right? The Pacers play a lot of 2 point guard groups. Nembhard starts. McConnell plays a lot. But they like to have, not always, but very often, 2 of McConnell, Haliburton, Nembhard on the floor, right? Nembhard has played 8 minutes this season. Now, granted, Andrew Nembhard's been injured. He's played 8 minutes this season without either of McConnell or Haliburton with him at all. That's unbelievable to me, right? They clearly like having him as the duo a lot of the time, but they have played McConnell, Haliburton 210 minutes this season, and they've played Nembhard, Haliburton 300 minutes together this season, despite Nembhard's injury, right? They clearly like getting to this, even 22 minutes for the McConnell-Nembhard duo in the limited chances the Pacers get. And some of the reason for that is extremely obvious and stuff I talked about back when the Pacers extended TJ McConnell. For a team that wants to play so fast and wants to play paint to great, as they say, get into the paint and see if a shot's there or the pass is there to keep your offense moving the way you want. When they're playing with purpose and playing the way they want, like they have the past 2 games, point guards are very valuable to that. If they can't have someone on the floor who can really get into the paint and make a defense move, they get very static. That's when they look like that team that looks not quite station to station, but just throws the ball around the perimeter kind of aimlessly. And so when they have one of those guys on the floor, it's obviously good. It's helpful. McConnell's been awesome this season. Haliburton, when he's at his best, has literally been their whole identity. Nembhard was maybe the best player on the floor for 2 conference finals games. That's a stretch, obviously, but he was very good in those games. Like, he can do those kind of things. They're all good players, but when there's 2 of them, there's a lot. You're attacking a bended defense in some cases instead of just being the person who cracks it yourself. And that just leads to more chances for a defense to mess up. So, like, big picture, that this makes sense. Small picture, I think Rick Carlisle kind of described it well after the Pacers' last game. And that's what I wanted to get to. He talked about how, like, when Andrew Nembhard's on the floor with Tyrese Haliburton, he is never, ever seeing the other team's best defender or best perimeter defender, right? That person's on Haliburton. And this, like, intuitively is obvious. But then you watch him have these moments where maybe he's in the opposite slot and defenders are drifting to Haliburton's side and he catches and he can just go and get by somebody. Or maybe he's being guarded by someone who just stinks at defense. And he can get to the shots or spots he wants, like, easily, right? His turnovers have been an issue, I think, since he returned. But outside of that, like, you've seen exactly why that pairing works so well. Beyond the defensive boost that Nembhard provides, that stylistically has been important. In fact, in the 300 minutes the Pacers have played with Nembhard, Haliburton, and No McConnell this year, Pacers have a plus 7.7 net rating. That's very good. That's extremely good. Their defense has been really good in those moments. That's with Haliburton on the floor, right? So some of that's Nembhard, obviously, but those groups do work, and they're not shooting that crazy good in those moments, right? And so I think there is something to that. Their offense is absurdly good when McConnell, Haliburton are out there together. 120.9 offensive rating for the Pacers this year in those 210 minutes. For a team that's offense hasn't been particularly good, that's impressive. In fact, of every combination of 1, 2, or 3 of Nembhard, Haliburton, McConnell on the floor, even the 0 of them on the floor combination, that 120.9 offensive rating is the best of any combo, right? Clearly, there's some juice to that offensively, and we know that from watching the games. But when you have 2 of them out there, not only are they both playing the Pacers style, they really help each other by taking away the pressure of the best defender or making things kind of change. Only 22 minutes of McConnell, Nembhard this season. Pacers shooting 10% from 3 in those minutes. Those aren't really worth diving into, both from sample and from just, like, terrible shooting luck. In fact, opponents shooting 44% in those moments. But in general, I think we've seen from past seasons too, all these duos work. And getting Nembhard back has made the starters look better and has made the Pacers rotation make a lot more sense. To the point about pressure, right? Absorbing an easier matchup or taking someone away from someone else. The numbers just make this so obvious, right? Andrew Nembhard, on or off the floor. When Andrew Nembhard is playing, he is out there with Tyrese Haliburton. Tyrese Haliburton's true shooting percentage is 60.5. That's quite good, right? If he was doing that this season, there would be absolutely 0 questions about any struggles or what's going wrong. If he had a 60.5% true shooting, that'd be awesome, right? For the like last season, for example, Haliburton's tear All-NBA season, that was his true shooting percentage, 60.5. This year, he's at 56.8. With Nembhard off the floor, Tyrese Haliburton's true shooting percentage this year is 54.3. Right? He sees different matchups. There's different open lanes. The defense isn't as cracked or bent. So there's not as many guys that are creating advantages, right? And the same goes for TJ McConnell. Even though these are extremely small minutes, like I said earlier, McConnell, 70.6% true shooting playing with Nembhard, 58 playing without him. Both very good numbers, to be clear. Flip it. Tyrese Haliburton, right? Do the same with him. When Tyrese Haliburton's on the floor, Andrew Nembhard's true shooting percentage is 56.5. That's pretty good. The Pacers will take that. And that's for a guy having a really down year so far, finishing plays. And that's because when Nembhard's playing without Haliburton, his true shooting percentage is 27.3. That's obviously unsustainably low. That will climb. But turns out that is exactly what Carlisle's saying. He gets those chances. They take pressure off each other. The shots are easier. They can do better stuff. TJ McConnell, exact same thing. TJ McConnell with Haliburton, 60.8% true shooting. TJ McConnell without Haliburton, 57.9. Both rock solid to good numbers, but still boosted by playing with their guard. It just makes everything easier. Even if Haliburton's absorbing the best matchup 80% of the time, but the other 20% is cross-matching or transition or whatever, everybody benefits from this reality. Everybody, right? I know that, and I think that's been intuitively obvious a lot of the time. But to really see it in action recently as the Pacers have played better, I think that's been very telling. So that's why I think the Pacers' 2-point guard lineups have worked so well. Haliburton's true shooting percentage with McConnell is 62.6, 54.1 without him. Like, it just, for everybody, this has been quite the boost. And so I think they'll keep trying to go to these as much as they can. The trouble is obviously Haliburton's the tallest of those three at 6'5", and he is the worst defender, even though he's had better defensive moments this year. And the other two are good defenders, but they're short, so they're kind of limited on who they can actually take reasonably. So there is a limit to like what they can really do for the Pacers, but they have been better with 2-point guards on the floor for the last 2 years since this has become their identity. And Nembhard being back immediately has kind of shown why that's the case, what that looks like. And I think Rick Carlisle said it perfectly in a way that made me really want to dive in just a little bit more to those numbers. We'll see if it carries through the road trip. That's going to matter. The rest of this week here on Locked On Pacers, until they play the Suns, obviously, is Derek week. I'm anointing that because our guest tomorrow will be Derek Kramer, who hasn't been on since before the season, which is like a very long time for us chatting about this team, even though I talk to him all the time about the Pacers. And then the day after, Derek Schultz will come on, friend of the pod. I used to talk to him all the time when he was hosting Fox Sports Radio. Can't wait for that as well. And then Pacers Suns. So the week is filled. It's going to be fun. Lots of guests, lots of fun stuff to discuss. Hope you guys enjoyed today's show as we wrap up the Thomas Bryant trade and can now look forward to other things. I'm on Twitter at Tony R. East, and this podcast is on Twitter at Locked On Pacers. On Blue Sky, same thing, at Tony R. East. Back tomorrow talking more Pacers with iPacers blog himself, Derek Kramer. Till then, everybody, have a wonderful day.